Hello ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to round 5 of the Apex Online Racing IMSA Lights Endurance Series, where today we shall be giving you coverage of Road America. Sorry for that slight mess up there. We're just in the lobby period of getting all the guys sorted and ready for the action. As I said, we're going to be racing at Road America, and the guys are going to have a little bit of a challenge this week in terms of the weather conditions here for this round. We're going to be racing in the wet weather, so we'll be starting off with a 20-minute qualifying session where none of the drivers will be allowed out on track for the first 5 minutes. This is just allow the track to saturate a little bit more because it starts off quite dry, and there's an advantage to getting in a lap time in those first 5 minutes. And obviously with both classes, both the GT4s and the LMP3 cars being out on track at the same time, we want to try and avoid a situation where some drivers have that advantage over others, and we want to even that playing field as best as we possibly can. So for that, we have a 5-minute grace period at the beginning of the session, where none of the cars will be going out onto the track. But after that 5 minutes are up, the track should be wet enough for the lap times to be pretty similar across the board for the remainder of the session, and the guys will be allowed on track to set their qualifying laps. Then after that, we've got ourselves our 60-minute race, and this is the calendar that we have been running so far in the season. So you can see that we're around 5 on the 28th of Feb at Road America for a 60-minute race. Our next race next week is going to be our final race of the season at the Daytona International Road Circuit, and that is going to be a race that lasts 90 minutes, an hour and a half in total. And you can also see that we have previously visited Circuit of the Americas in round 1. Round 2 was at Watkins Glen GP. Laguna Seca was round 3. And then last week we were at Long Beach for a 90-minute race. So let's get into the results and how they've updated the championship standings from last week's action at Long Beach. Here are the race results for the LMP3 class. And you can see that ADA came away with the win and finishing ahead of Smolder in second with Brzanczek in third. Marco the Pirate came home in fourth with Ruddy Bird in fifth position. And then Jay Peaches was our last LMP3 finisher to come across the line. And Logan, Flaming Parrot, Bo, Aaron and Scott Burnett were all drivers who participated in the qualifying session, however didn't make it to see the checkered flag. So it's quite a heavy race of attrition at Long Beach, obviously with the walls being very, very close. That was quite a big challenge for the drivers, especially at 90 minutes in length as well. The guys really had to focus hard and make sure that they didn't make any mistakes or try to avoid making any mistakes that would see themselves going into the walls and potentially putting them out of the race. So this is what it's done to the LMP3 championship standings. Aid the Ace is still up there at the moment with 36 points, and he's got a 9-point lead to Smolder in second. So the championship fight is still very much up there, up for grabs in the LMP3 championship. Obviously, Aid the Ace, if he actually gets or ekes his lead out by another point over the other drivers, then he could actually potentially, he could win this, actually 2 points, sorry. He needs to gain over his closest competitor, Smolder. If he gets those 2 points, then he could come away with winning the LMP3 championship this time round. And you can see that Boat in third place. He started off very, very strongly last week at Long Beach, but unfortunately ran into an issue and that forced him to retire. He's got 24 points at the moment, only 3 points behind Smolder. Ruddy Bird is in fourth position with 17 points, with Brzanczek in fifth with 15 points. Marco the Pirate there in sixth position with 10 points. GTS Jeremy has got 7 points to his name in seventh position, with Flaming Parrot in eighth position, just 3 points behind him with 4 points in total. Martinez Maxime has 3 points, and he is sat joint ninth with J Peaches, Inferno, and Intergalactic Gentleman, as you can see there up on the scoreboards. And there are a couple of other drivers who are outside the top 12 as well, who have also scored points. So in 13th position, we have Minesco. He's got 2 points to his name, as well as Andrew Harper. So joint 13th for those two. And then Aaron is in 15 points with a single point to his name. So that is the LMP3 standings currently so far. And Paul Scott, no, we do not have a LMP2 championship currently. There will possibly be a endurance series that will be running after this IMSA Lights endurance series has come to its conclusion, where there's, I believe this time around, it could possibly be either LMP1 or LMP2 cars, and then one of the other GT car classes as well. But unfortunately, we don't have a LMP2 championship running at the moment. But jumping back to the round 4 results, we got the GT4 cars and their finishing positions from the previous round. So Scott V came away with another win, and that's going to give him another additional 16 points with Dakuza in second. We got there Marauder in third place in his KTM crossbow, with Andrex actually finishing in ninth place. That's Scott's teammate. Andrex actually didn't get to see the checkered flag in the end, unfortunately, as he had some issues with a back marker or a LMP3 car lapping him, and then he ended up finding the wall quite swiftly afterwards, which forced him to retire. But Brake Check came home in 4th position. We've pushed him there in 5th. Colonel McCoy in 6th place, with Neela in 7th. And then the final GT4 car to come across the line was also Carlito in P9. And then, like I said, Carlito in P8. And then, like I said, Andrex in P9. Empower also retired in P10. Milo and David Simon were also retirements from the previous round as well. And then this is how the championship standings look currently, with Scott V there leading the way by a solid 30 points at the moment. I believe that he needs to get, if I can remember correctly off the top of my head, I think either P9 or P10 in this round, and he will be crowned the GT4 class champion if he can do that. Obviously, his other closest title rivals will be looking to try and get a decent race and score a big haul of points to try and close that gap up to the leader. And Dakuza is his closest competitor at the moment in that BMW M3 GT4 car, with 34 points to his name. And then we got Marauder there in his KTM with 33 points, so only a single point behind Dakuza, with Scott's teammate Andrex in P4, and both Scott and Andrex have wrapped up the GT4 championship, or shall I say team championship. Those two have got a fairly significant points lead over the rest of the GT4 teams, and they've already taken that crown. Empower was in P5 with 28 points, and Brake Check is also joint P5, sharing that with him. And Neela is there in 8th place, with Colonel McCoy just in front of him in P7, so 25 points for Colonel McCoy and 22 for Neela. And GTS Carlito in P9 with 15 points, also sharing that position with Pushdom as well, his teammate. And then TPW, Ticklish Pickerwickle, there with 9 points to his name, with Milo just behind him by a single point difference between the two of them, so he's got 8 points in total. And then the only other GT4 driver who has scored points so far this season is David Simon, and he's in 13th position on the championship standings with 6 points to his name. And then there's no other GT4 drivers who have participated this season who have scored any points. So that is the GT4 championship standings. We'll take a run through the various drivers and what cars they will be driving in this round TPW that we can see on screen there in that Toyota GT86, the only Toyota GT86 that we have in the field in this championship. It's kind of nice to see some variety. It would have been nice if a couple of other drivers in the GT4 class in particular picked a little bit more variance. Both the Ginetta G55 and also the Porsche Cayman were banned from participating in this league for balancing reasons. So as you'll see with some of the other GT4 cars, so if we jump up to M-Power, he's there in the Ford Mustang Boss, and there is also another Ford Mustang which would have been available to the drivers, the RTR GT4, but none of the drivers ended up taking it. Instead, what the majority of drivers ended up taking was this car right here, the Aston Martin V8 Vantage GT4. And we just saw a shot there of Marauder in his KTM crossbow. And Brake Check was the driver that we took a look at in that Aston Martin. Takuza is there in the BMW M3. And yeah, that's providing a little bit more variance to the field, and it's quite nice to see an older car there as well. Carlito is in an Aston Martin, as is also Gav, who is a new driver as far as I know to the league. I haven't seen him participate in any of the other previous rounds in the IMSA Lights Endurance Series. So it's interesting to see what kind of performance and pace that he actually has here, and we can actually see that M-Power is there crawling down the pit lane, but I don't think he'll actually be driving out of the pit lane itself. I think he's just there trundling along towards the end, and also looks like that Bo is in the LMP3 car is also going up there to park up at the exit as well. Obviously a few guys wanting to try and get good track position for this race, so that's quite interesting to actually see. Yeah, so Carlito, as we were saying, in the Aston Martin. Gav there, also in the Aston Martin, he's formed up third in the queue to pull out the pit lane. Andrex, also in that Aston Martin. Nyla is there in the KTM crossbow. It's quite nice to see those cars. I don't think it will fare too well at this circuit, though. It's quite a power-hungry track, and although the KTM does have very, very good stability and cornering, it's not so great when it comes to the straights. Scott, our GT4 class leader, he's there in his Aston Martin, currently sat in his pit box, and as is Pushton there in his GT4, and as we saw earlier, TPW is sat there in his GT86. Now, when it comes to the LMP3 cars, the guys have two choices. They have the choice of either the Ligier JSP3, which Aid the Ace is driving here, or rather conveniently, Logan is driving, as he just went past, or that could alternatively have been Flaming Parrot. We'll find out relatively soon. The Dow Kings also in a Ligier, going up to join the back of the queue at the end of the pit lane there. There is that Ginetta G57 LMP3 car that Reddy-Bird is driving, as is the LMP3 that's behind him. Both V8 engines, very good performance. I think it's, I believe, around I can't quite remember off the top of my head what horsepower they actually run, but both cars are pretty much near enough identical in terms of performance and restrictions. There you can see the queue forming up at the back of the grid. Aaron is there, and if we can actually go ahead and find who's there in that, Scott's in that train. So they're all starting to drive out of the pit lane now because this 5-minute grace period is up. So the car's starting to take to the track, find out what the conditions are like. But Bonetto is not in a rush at all. He's sat there in his Ligier. Bazanchek is coming out of the pit lane in his Ligier now. Bo is there at the very front of that train in his Ginetta. He's been putting in some strong performances, but he unfortunately had that issue last week in round 4, which ended up forcing him to retire, and he's actually also returned back to the pit lane for now as well. I'm guessing to possibly just double check some things. There he goes, returning back out onto the circuit. Smolder's out on track, he's in the Ginetta and MP3 car, and as is Minisco, he's just pulling out the pit lane in the Ligier. J Peaches is in the Ligier as well. Flaming Parrot is in the, there he is, the Ginetta. So it was him that I saw earlier and not his teammate. Oh, that's Scott in the background having a slight spin, but this is an outlap, so it doesn't really matter, providing he hasn't picked up any damage as of yet. And then Intergalactic Gentleman there is driving around in his Ginetta as well. So track conditions look pretty damn tricky at the moment. I think what we'll try and do is try and pick up one of the guys who is going around somewhat nearish the front. Let's try and join Smolder, and we'll jump on board in the roof camera of him to get an idea as to just how wet this circuit actually is. We've had about 5 minutes of rainfall falling onto the circuit already, so that's going to dampen the track even more from its starting state. But one of the things that the drivers do need to watch out for in these light rain conditions is the build-up of the puddles around the circuit in the lowest points. As we see a car off in the gravel over in the background there, so obviously someone already starting to struggle a little bit with these conditions. But yeah, you can see the reflective water on top of the surface. What we're looking out for is the big puddles. So Smolder's coming through the final turn now, and he'll be looking to begin his qualifying his lap as he darts to the left hand side of, I believe that was Gav. So they come up across the start finish line now, and there seems like there's a slight dry line just going up the hill there with a few cars clearing a little bit of water in front of him. So here he comes into the first turn. Turn 2 is near enough non-existent just here as they're coming down the hill. A tiny little kink they've just gone past there. Turn 3, looking out for any big puddles. It didn't really seem like there was anything, but he's got M-Power in front of him kicking up a little bit of spray, but for that was pretty short-lived as Smolder cruised past him. We're going through turn 4 now, which is basically a straight, and down into the braking zone of turn 5 just here, braking very, very late actually. Managing to hold it and keep it within the confines of the track though. Quite surprising how late the LMP3 cars can actually get on the brakes down there into turn 5. They've just gone through turn 6, and now this is turn 7 just here. Again, not seeing any huge puddles or water build up as of yet, as we come now into turn 8. We're then going to flick it into turn 9, a long carousel, and then turn 10 basically merges straight into it. So this is a corner that is, well, essentially 2 corners rolled into one. Turn 11 is going to be the kink, which is going to be very, very testing for the drivers. As I imagine the GT4 cars may need to lift it a little bit, but that will be easily flat out in the LMP3 cars. We're going through turn 11A at the moment, and then into Canada Corner, which is turn 12 now. Again, no real dramas there, before flicking the car into turn 13, which is this left-hander. Smolder's just carried his speed through, and then turn 14 is going to be the final turn. And yeah, you can see a little bit of a slightly drier portion of track just coming up the hill there, where a lot of the cars have been driving, and then it seems to kind of wetten a lot more. Smolder goes and pops himself temporarily up into 3rd position. The Ace is currently the man who has got himself on a provisional pole position if we chuck up the speedo there, and also the track map we can keep an eye on whereabouts the busier portions of the circuit actually are, and also see what the drivers' rough braking and throttle inputs are. They are smoothed out a fair amount more in that UI widget, but you do at least get a rough sense of what they're actually doing. So Aid the Ace at the moment is just following another Ligier there in front of him, also doing a little bit of brake warming as well. It's actually Dowking who has popped himself up into 2nd place. I believe this is the first time that we've seen Dowking participating in the IMSA Lights Endurance Series. He has been racing in the GT3 Series, and he put in a very solid effort last night as well. Scored some decent points, and you can see there that Dowking actually has his lights on, whereas Aid the Ace doesn't. And drivers with their lights on indicates that they're on a flying lap or a hot lap, and those with their lights off, then they're just kind of plodding around either on a cool down lap or a warm up lap, or you know, an out lap or potential in lap. But now Aid the Ace has got his lights on to indicate to any other drivers that he is now actually on a hot lap, and obviously helps communicate things a little bit better between themselves and the GT4 cars as well, so they know. Dowking picks up a little bit of slipstream from TPW, so he's going to come across the line, and it doesn't improve. He, to be fair, matched his time, but only by 0.07 of a second did he lose out. So Smolder is currently holding third position at the moment. Bazanchik is currently holding fourth, but he's coming across the line now to actually pop himself up into third position with 8 minutes remaining in the session. Bo is currently there in fourth, and actually Smolder's gone and popped himself back up into third place. So yeah, Bo is there in fifth. Menisco is currently holding sixth position and has got his teammate directly there in front of him. The two United Autosports Ligiers there running line astern. Flaming Parrot in his Ginetta is currently holding seventh. Jay Peaches is Menisco's teammate. Reddy Bird has actually gone and popped himself up into 8th place, which is demoted Jay Peaches for the moment. And then Intergalactic Gentleman is the final LMP3 driver that we have currently in the standings. Actually, no, scratch that. We've got two other drivers. Aaron, who is just coming out onto the track and is yet to set a properly representative lap time. And then Bonetto is the other LMP3 driver, who is also yet to actually set a lap time. And as you can see, he's just trying to find a little bit of space, as he's got the BMW there in front of him of D'Acusa, who is on a flying lap. Bonetto's currently not on a flying lap, but he'll be going for it now. And with the power difference between the two, Bonetto will easily cruise past without D'Acusa actually affecting him. So let's take a look at the GT4 cars. M-Power is currently holding provisional pole position in the GT4 class. D'Acusa is currently holding second, with Scott in third place and his teammate Andrex in fourth. Fifth in class is Gav. See that, the newcomer. So it'll be good to keep an eye on him and see what his pace is going to be like this time round. Marauder is there in sixth place in his KTM. Like I said earlier, I reckon the KTMs are probably going to struggle at this circuit, because it's very much a power track, not really suited to the low power of the KTM. And then Pushdom is there in 7th place with Carlito in 8th. He's got a little bit of damage there on the front of his car, but that's probably not representative of what he actually has. I imagine if he did incur any damage in this qualifying session, he would have jumped back to the pits to have gotten that repaired. So that's just something our end. TPW is currently holding 9th in class in his GT86. Nyla is there in 10th place in his KTM, and then Brakecheck is the last GT4 driver in his Aston Martin, but I don't think we've quite seen a representative lap time from Brakecheck as of yet, as usually he's a little bit higher up in the GT4 class. But he's got there one of the drivers coming up the inside of him. It wasn't Menisco, trying to remember off the top of my head who it was. It wasn't Reddy Bird either. Definitely not Jay Peaches, as Jay Peaches is just teleported back to the pit lane after finding the wall somewhere along the line. Aid the Ace is currently sat in the pit lane, just chilling out with 5 minutes remaining in this session. He currently holds provisional pole position, but Dowking is actually out on circuit at the moment, trying to find a little bit more lap time, see if he can close up onto the back of Aid the Ace. And usually Bo, who's currently holding 5th position at the moment, he's pretty strong pace-wise, and and he's usually pretty close to Aid the Ace in terms of race pace, but at the moment he's 2.2 seconds off of Aid the Ace's pace. Could just be that the track is continuing to get wetter and even more saturated, and the lap times just aren't quite there anymore. So it's more experience for the drivers at this point, driving around the circuit, unless they can actually find a little bit more time. Obviously Bo's coming up to the start finish line now, so we'll see if he actually improves on his lap. And he does a little bit, yes. He improves it by a good 5 to 6 tenths of a second. Gets himself closer up to Brzancek in front of him lap time wise, or yeah, qualifying lap time wise, but wasn't quite enough to actually gain a position. We'll stay on board with Bo though to try and keep an eye out where these puddles are forming. There is one on the exit of turn 3 there, starting to run across the width of the circuit, and there was also one in the braking zone on the approach to turn 1 as well that I managed to notice on the left hand side of the circuit, so the drivers need to be careful of that. See if there's any coming down here into turn 5, and yes, there's a puddle starting to form there right on the turning point, which could unsettle the car a little bit more than the drivers would like if they have not come across that puddle before. But at the moment, Bo is 600ths of a second up on his previous fastest, so he's looking good to improve, but he's got a couple of cars up here in the distance that he's hoping he'll be able to clear relatively quickly without being hindered. It looks like they are both GT4 cars. No, one of them is an LMP3, the other one's a GT4. The GT4 gets well out of the way, but the LMP3 car is still there at the moment. It doesn't look like there's any puddles coming through sorry, the turn 9 and 10 carousel coming through the kink. Things are looking wet, but no standing water there. And now there we see he's gone up by 3 tenths of a second on his previous best. That would be enough to pop him up into potentially 3rd position if he can hold and keep it clean for the remainder of this lap. Obviously he's got this LMP3 here in front of him, which probably isn't helping through these final 2 turns with the dirty air, but it may actually help him get a little bit of slipstream coming up to the start finish line. So he's picking that up now. And where will Bo end up popping himself on the leaderboard? 2nd position, closing that gap to 7 tenths of a second between himself and Aid the Ace. It's going to continue on, but TPW is there, and that LMP3 car that we saw that is in front of Bo on track, siding past on the inside into turn 1. It was in fact Dowking. Was starting to suspect that it was, as Dowking ends up going round and spinning, and he ends up teleporting back to the pits before he actually goes and finds the wall. So I don't think Dowking is going to be participating any further in this session. Neither is Aid the Ace. We've only got 1 minute and 20 odd seconds remaining. There's not going to be enough for them to get out on track and begin a new lap. So Bo at the moment, he's only just started this lap, but he's 7 tenths of a second down and very, very sideways there through turn 6. Does end up dropping the car. That'll be him back to the pit lane, as he will not have another chance to get another lap in. Smolder is currently out on track, and where is he? He's just coming through the kink. So, ooh, as that is Andrex in the background that we can see there, getting very, very loose and sideways going through the kink, but he's managed to keep it out the wall. So I imagine Andrex will probably continue on and try to cross the line before these remaining 40 odd seconds come to a close. But yeah, Smolder after this lap will get one more opportunity as well. Where is Brzancek? He's coming into that Canada corner turn 12. It's going to be very, very close and marginal for him to actually make the start finish line. Obviously Smolder's going to do it quite easily by a good 19, 18 odd seconds. So he's 4.2 seconds off on the previous lap, but obviously I think he got interfered a little bit by Andrex. He's got a lot of clear air in front of him though, so Smolder's going to be one to watch. Brzancek coming across the line now with only just a couple of seconds to spare, and he is going to get one more opportunity at this qualifying session. No other drivers are going to be able to do it. So Ruddy Bird is on his final lap. He's just come out of the carousel and coming towards the kink now. Aaron is currently out on circuit as well. It looks like he's on a flying lap. He's coming down towards turn 7. He's just gone through that corner, and he does also have a 1 grid place penalty as well as Marauder in the GT4 class. Peaches is in the pits as well as Bernetto and Intergalactic Gentleman. Empower is still holding provisional pole position for the GT4 cars. Dakuza isn't going to threaten him as he's back in the pit lane. Scott is diving into the pit lane, so it seems like Empower is going to come away with pole position in the GT4 class, and Scott, for the potentially first time actually starting from somewhere other than P1 on the grid. Let's see what's going on. Our Smolder's gone back to the pit lane, so he is not going to be completing his lap. He's obviously made a mistake somewhere along the line, but Bazanchek is still pushing on, or at least he was before he got down to turn 5 and made a mistake running deep there. So Ready Bird has come across the line. He's not going to improve his position. Aaron is coming through the final turn now, so keep an eye on him. And I believe that is Breakcheck that is there behind him as well. Breakcheck currently still in that last position in the GT4 class. Will Aaron improve on his lap time though? He's currently got a 2 minute 11.9, and it doesn't look like he has improved his lap time. Does Breakcheck improve his lap time? I'm not entirely sure if he did or not, but he's still going to be starting from the back of the GT4 class. Empower is the last driver to come across the line, but he had secured pole for the GT4s anyway. So here is the LMP3 classification then, with AD Ace starting on pole, Bo second, Dowking third, Smolder fourth, Bazanchek fifth, Ruddybird sixth, Minisco, Flaming Power, Aaron and J Peaches rounding out the top 10, with Bonetto and Intergalactic Gentleman in 11th and 12th place. Empower takes pole for GT4 with Dakuza, Scott, Andrex, Marauder rounding up the top 5, Gav in 6th place, pushed him 7th, Neela there in 8th place, Carlito 9th, TPW, Mr. Ticklish Picklewickle starting in 10th place, and then Breakcheck starting from 11th, but of course Marauder has that 1 grid place penalty as well, so I think Gav will be the man starting in 5th position. So here we go then into the race session. As we said earlier, it's going to be 60 minutes in total in race length, and the guys just have a 2 minute period between now and the actual beginning of the race, where they get the opportunity to double check their car setup, make sure that they've got the right setup applied to the car for the race, make sure that they've got the right amount of fuel that they are hoping to carry for this race, and obviously got the right tyres, because they will need to be on the wet tyres for these wet conditions. Also gives them an opportunity to double check their pit strategies as well, and there isn't a mandatory pit stop in this race. However, there may be a possibility that we see some guys gamble and going for a change later on, as the conditions are due to clear up and stop raining halfway through. So we'll see a bit of a wet to dry transition, but it really depends on how quickly the track actually ends up drying out. That will determine whether jumping onto a slick dry tyre will be viable, or whether it's better to just stay on the wet. A number of drivers were reporting that in the kind of later mixed conditions, the final 15-20 minutes or so, the slicks were quicker by about 5 to 6 seconds per lap faster than the wet tyres, but obviously the pit lane here at Road America is quite long. The start-finish straight is high speed, and actually trundling down the pit lane at 60 kilometers per hour, and then taking 14 to 16 odd seconds to change tyres. Obviously, the amount of time that you lose in that pit stop, it's a lot of time to make back up. So that is going to be the determining factor as to whether it'll be worth actually making the pit stop or not later on. But with more cars on track, could actually potentially see the track drying out a little bit quicker than some of the drivers found in that test session that they run. So it'll be interesting to see, that's for sure. And we're just getting the manual formation lap that we perform here at AOR underway. So as you saw, none of the guys actually went racing on that green light, and instead what they do is they'll just trundle around the circuit at 120 kilometers per hour or 80 miles per hour, and then I didn't want that, sorry, I wanted the speedo. And then once they get to a certain point around the circuit, I believe in and around turn 13, once they get to there, the drivers will form up into a 2x2 formation, and they will reduce their speed down to 80 kilometers per hour and 50 miles per hour, and they'll retain that 2x2 formation until they get to an acceleration zone, which should be between the bridge on the start finish line and the actual start line itself. Anywhere between those 2 points, the leader of the class will put his foot down hard on the accelerator, and only once can he do that, and that will signify the beginning of the race. So obviously being in pole position gives you an advantage of controlling when the race actually begins. In some ways, although it's quite nice to have the clear track in front of you starting in P2, it's also quite difficult to actually see when the race leader, who will be alongside you, when they actually put their foot down and actually get going. So in some ways it's better to be starting in P3 than it is P2, because you have better line of sight on the driver in front. Now the GT4 cars will separate themselves from the LMP3 cars a bit, as you can see here on the track map. If we jump on board with the reef cam, you can see the LMP3 cars in the distance. This is basically to create 2 separate starts, with the LMP3s going first obviously, and then the GT4s later. Makes it a little bit easier for myself, and it also helps to keep the chaos levels down a little bit, with avoiding any situations where the GT4 cars get mixed in and amongst the LMP3 cars. You can see the drivers are still just doing some tyre warming, just crawling around at the speeds. And yes, Francis, this is the sweet voice of Yorkie that you can hear. So yeah, it's just after this corner, and as they start to come through turn 13, they'll form up in their 2x2 formation and will drop down in speed. The weaving will be reduced to a minimum as well, because obviously you'll have guys there alongside you. But what we shall do is watch these guys for the start for the first couple of turns, and then we'll pick up the GT4 cars with their race start, and we should get the multi-class action for round 5 here at Road America of the Apex Online Racing IMSA Light Endurance Series underway. So at the moment, Aid the Ace just keeping things at a nice crawl coming up the hill. Anytime between now and the start finish line, he can put his foot down. He hasn't done so yet. Still just testing the drivers. There he goes for it, and now we're actually underway with round 5, and it seems like Dalking has got the jump on Bo. Like I was saying, that P3 being a little bit better and easier to use rather than P2. Bo immediately going defensive to Smolder behind him. Bo actually could be dropping down into 4th position. Smolder slightly off the track there on the outside. Does sacrifice that position back to Bo. So at the moment, Bo holding P2. A couple of the drivers behind there in various different positions as well. Let's go and take a look at the GT4 cars as M-Power has begun the race there. Dakuza's very much coming under threat from Scott, with Scott on his inside trying to take that P2 coming into turn 1. Dakuza giving him a little bit of a squeeze though on the inside, making sure that Andrex can't slide himself through either. And at the moment, Scott has managed to get him up into 2nd place. Guys looking all pretty calm and collected for the moment. That Scott is immediately going on the offensive on Empire as well on the exit of turn 3, coming down Moraine Sweep down towards, well, we're coming through a pretty much imaginary turn 4 down into the heavy braking zone of turn 5. Scott looking to the inside in these wet conditions. Empower taking that puddle there, that could unsettle the car a little bit. Scott coming very, very close, almost a little bit of a tap there on the rear quarter of that Mustang in front of him. Doesn't really seem to affect Scott all that much. Instead, we get a tiny little bit of lag there, I believe, on my end. Instead, Scott right there underneath the rear wing. I think that was a little bit of a bump there going into turn 7. Very, very close. And now actually Andrex is having a look to the inside of Dakuza coming into turn 8. And he's got that position pretty much taken, although Dakuza's coming back at him on the exit there. Guys battling with the tricky wet conditions as well as each other. So very, very good stuff. Let's jump back up to the front of the LMP3 field, and Dowking is holding on to the back of ADA so far. At the moment, it's not letting ADA run away with it, although Bo and Smolder have dropped off the back of the leading pair, and there's been a little bit of a gap, a few more gaps that is actually starting to form between the various drivers. If you jump on board with the cockpit camera, you can see that Dowking's picking up the slipstream on the 80 Ace coming into turn 1. He's going for that move down the inside. Will he be able to hold it together? 80 Ace just slotting in behind him for now, not really threatening and battling him too much. Obviously, this being a 60-minute race, they've got plenty of time to try and work out positions and use potential strategies throughout those 60 minutes to get themselves the best result possible. But Dowking with a very nice move there up into P1. It'll be interesting to see what kind of pace that Dowking actually has and whether he can actually pull away from the Ace as they come in towards that puddle. Dowking taking nice avoiding action there, going the slightly shorter route. I think a few of the other drivers coming into that as well, as actually Reddybo goes a little bit deep, clipping the edge of that puddle. He's run a little bit wide, but he's holding on in 6th position at the moment, with Bazanchek just over a second up the road, and then a little bit further is Bo and Smolder. Let's jump back to the GT4s. Scott is still following Empower for the moment, hasn't managed to find a way past him, but again has got a decent run coming off the exit of turn 3, trying to use some of this slipstream coming down this long back straight here. And actually Scott is pulling away from the Aston Martin despite having that slipstream. Surely the guys are going to be a little bit more wary of this puddle here on that outside there, right on the turning point. Scott was, but he still went a little bit deep there, under braking, allowing Scott to come back at him. Sorry, Empower going a little bit deep. Scott managing to make the corner quite nicely. There's a puddle starting to form there as Empower gets caught up on the curb there on the exit of turn 6. Scott certainly seems to be applying an awful lot of pressure, and Empower going defensive coming into the right-hander of turn 8, forcing Scott to go the long way around, with Empower shutting that door on the exit. It's not going to allow Scott through, and this has actually allowed Dakuza and also Andrex to close up on the battle. So we've got a 4-way fight for the lead in the GT4 class. Very entertaining stuff as Scott goes and dips the wheels out onto the grass on the exit. Gav isn't too far behind. Scott very, very close. Let's jump on board with Dakuza and view it from their position. It's just a wall of spray coming from the two cars in front as Scott is looking to the inside of Empower coming into the next corner. Scott going for the slightly later braking. Empower going for the switchback. Oh, Scott's going to lose the car. He's going to make contact with Dakuza. That's going to be damage to the front of the BMW and damage to the side of Scott's Aston Martin. I don't know if Andrex got caught up in that or whether he managed to avoid making contact with his teammate. But Scott going for the opportunistic move, braking that little bit later than Empower. He ended up going deep and losing the car right as he was starting to turn in. And although he he momentarily held the lead of the GT4 class just for a moment, that mistake has gone and cost him and dropped him into 3rd position. He's gone and lost some ground to Dakuza, and obviously Dakuza's gone and lost ground to Empower with that as well. So that's relieved Empower a little bit of some of the pressure that was being applied to him. But I'm almost certain that both Dakuza and Scott are going to have damage from that. I don't know if Andrex has got any damage, or like I said, whether he did manage to avoid making contact with his teammate and the guys in front of him. Gav has managed to close up the gap a little bit with that incident. Judging by the look of Andrex's car, from what I can see at the moment, it doesn't seem like he has any damage to the front, so I think Andrex Andrex has managed to avoid it as Scott has another wiggle and a spin that has going to cost him 2 positions. Andrex having to take a little bit avoiding action again, but Gav has now also pinched that position off Scott with his mistake. You can see here Marauder is chasing down, pushed him just in front of him, and then we've got another 4-car fight for 8th position in class. Nyla is leading the chain with TPW, Brake Check and Carlito running in behind. So there's a number of battles throughout the field at the moment. You can see on the previous lap that AD Ace was able to close the gap to Dowking by a good 0.6 of a second on the previous lap. So he had dropped off previously and then has reclosed that gap back up a little bit more, and Bo also making a little bit of ground on Dowking, only by a 1/10, and has actually eked out a tiny little bit of a gap to Smolder as well. Those two were fairly close together, but that gap is now lingering in and around 1.8 seconds at the moment. Brady Bird and Brzanczek not too far apart from each other either, just over a second between the two. As Brady Bird runs a little bit wide, then is actually pulling out a little bit of the dirt and mud back onto the circuit, hence you can see it getting a little bit muddy on the exit there of turn 7. Flaming Parrot is very close to the back of Aaron. I think these are the two closest LMP3 drivers that we have on the circuit at the moment. You can see just the amount of spray being kicked up by Aaron in front of him that Flaming Parrot is having to contend with. He's doing a good job of keeping the car within the confines of the circuit though. May need to lift slightly coming through the kink. Nope, completely flat out, not even a hint of a lift going through that turn 11. He's closing up a little bit, under braking with that concertina effect, presenting himself slightly in the mirrors of Aaron in front, but Aaron wasn't fazed by that and continues on as he was, as Flaming Parrot goes and runs wide there out the exit of turn 13. That's going to cost him a little bit of ground. He's going to drop a few car lengths off the back of Aaron because of that as well. So let's jump back up to the GT4 cars. You see, pushed him, hunting down the KTM of Marauder in front of him, but isn't going to be anywhere near close enough to mount an attack coming into this corner. You can actually see the puddles are starting to form there on the right hand side of the circuit, right on the turning point, but also there at the apex as well. So the driver's going to need to be very cautious and wary of that. And pushed him actually has Gav behind him. So Gav has actually gone and lost a whole bunch of positions, as he was further up. He was in 4th position in class. He's now dropped down into 7th position in class. So he's made a mistake somewhere along the line. Potentially had an half spin or has gone off track. And then we've got the battle between Brake Check, Carlito, TPW and Nyla, and a whole bunch of positions have changed round here. Nyla was previously leading this train with TPW, the second car in it, then Brake Check and Carlito, but Brake Check and Carlito have now managed to get themselves ahead of both TPW and also Nyla as well, and actually the race leaders are starting to close in on these GT4 cars, so we'll be seeing our first little bit of lap car action. The guys need to be aware of these guys coming through as they're kind of semi-battling. Dowking going to the right, having to take to the grass a little bit as he passed TPW, but got through quite nicely. Aid the Ace diving down the inside of the cars. That's going to allow him to close up onto the back of Dowking slightly. Dowking taking to the grass again to try and get past these two Aston Martins. Aid the Ace though, choosing to swap, go round the inside and then the outside of the other, coming out through the exit of turn 13 and around the outside of turn and into turn 14. Bo seems to have cleared these guys relatively easy, and Smolder's actually powering on through as well. And it seems like he's got a slightly better run than Bo had coming out the final turn and coming up the hill. He's closing up underneath the slipstream. Isn't going to be close enough though to do anything about it in turn 1, but providing he can stay here and get a decent run coming off the exit of turn 3, he could potentially be in the pound seat, picking up that slipstream on the run down Moraine sweep. I don't think he's going to be close enough to mount a challenge here. We've also got some LMP3 cars that the guys, GT4 cars that the guys need to contend with as well. GT4 cars doing a good job of holding their line and letting the LMP3 drivers go without too much hindrance. And unlike most traditional single class racing, when you get the booth flags in multi-class racing, if it is another class car and the faster class car, the slower class cars, in this case the GT4 cars, are instructed to hold their racing line or hold the line that they're on to make themselves as predictable as possible for the LMP3 drivers, and the LMP3 drivers are to basically judge the best time to pass. And Smolder is having some difficulty here, as you can see, in getting past Marauder and also Gav, I believe it was, and has gone and lost a whole load of ground to Bo. The gap was well within half a second. It's now increased up to 4.5 seconds or thereabouts. And that is just the ebbs and flows of multi-class racing. That's how it works. Sometimes when you meet the traffic, it works with you and you gain over your opponents. Sometimes you catch them in a bad spot, such as catching them just as you're coming into a braking zone for a corner, and you end up getting held up and obviously lose ground to your competitors. And here you can see some more action with the guys coming through, Flame and Parrot chasing Aaron. Again, just taking his time, being cautious with the GT4 traffic. There's no point in getting too bold and making any daring moves with the GT4 cars in the lap traffic situations, as it could very easily lead to a mistake, contact between the two, and affecting or potentially ruining both drivers' races. So the guys like to take a little bit of caution and try to communicate as clearly as possible between themselves as to when is the best time to actually make that overtaking manoeuvre. And here you can see that Aid the Ace has actually managed to close up onto the back of Dowking on the previous lap, taking a good second out of him in those previous lap times there up in the top left. None of the drivers at the moment have picked up any track limits penalties, which is good and pleasing to see. Guys obviously doing a good job of keeping their cars within the white lines, or if they do go exploring beyond them, they're not gaining any advantage and therefore not picking up any penalties. But you can see that dirt and mud is building up there, increasing in size on the exit of turn 7. Yeah, now that Dowking and Aid the Ace have cleared the GT4 traffic for now, they seem to be pulling away a fair amount. Let's jump back up to the GT4 battle. We've got Andrax and also Dakuza here going at it with an LMP car going around their outside, which is entitled to do. It does have the downforce advantage over the GT4 cars. Oh, Andrax getting very, very close there to that LMP3 driver. He switches to the inside going through the kink. That could potentially affect Dakuza's momentum. Looks like it may have slightly, as Andrax is closing up in the slipstream, pressing on through the spray. At the moment it's not really quite close enough to make a lunge under braking coming into Canada corner. Dakuza holding a slightly defensive line as well, just to make sure that Andrax doesn't get presented with an opportunity to come at him. Instead, Andrax is following him through for the moment as they come into the final turn. They'll be coming across the start-finish line relatively soon. You see Andrax trying to pick up the slipstream of the M3 in front of him. Will the Aston Martin have the legs over the BMW though? It doesn't look like he does. It looks like the BMW's got slightly better top end speed in comparison to the Aston Martin. I know that Andrax likes to run with a relatively safe car setup, so he's probably running with more wing angle and more downforce, which is obviously going to hurt his straight line speed but improve his car's cornering ability and general stability as well, especially in these wetter conditions. So although he may not really be able to do too much on the straights, it's where the corners come in, is where he'll fare a little bit better than Dakuza will. They come into the braking zone now of turn 5. Puddle increasing in size, both on the entry to the corner and also midway through. But still, for the moment, Andrax not really close enough. Let's come and take a look at some of the LMP3 drivers. J Peaches chasing down Aaron still. That gap still within a second. There's some damage to the front of J Peaches' car. Don't know whether that is through incident with someone, as he goes and drops the car on the exit of turn 5. Just runs a little bit too wide out onto the curb, which is pretty wet and slippery, and these LMP3 cars do not have any driver aids. There's no traction control, stability control, or ABS, so it's all down to driver skill and their engineering skill with the setup. But yeah, J Peaches dropping the car on the exit of turn 5 there. Obviously getting too eager on that throttle. It's gone and obviously dropped him down away off the back of Aaron as Burnetto and Intergalactic Gentleman are actually going at each other. Burnetto going around the outside of Intergalactic Gentleman, running very, very deep though, and off out wide into the very wet and muddy grass on the exit of turn 6, and that's allowed Intergalactic Gentleman to hold on to that position and put an end to that battle between those two drivers. So we'll jump back up to P2 and P3 in the GT4 class, with Andrex still lurking all over the back of Dakuza, and Dakuza is actually coming into the pit lane. He's got plenty of fuel, so I'm not entirely sure why he is actually diving into the pit lane. He does have a bit of damage to his car, I believe, so unless he's going in for repair, which is a bit unusual, I highly doubt he's going to be taking tyres in these conditions. We'll see how long it takes. I'll see how long that he's remaining still. Obviously we saw the pit crew doing a little bit of work there on the car, but I'm not entirely sure if that was actually representative of what he was actually going and asking for. So I'm more just kind of keeping an eye on as to how long Dakuza is sat there for. He maybe have gone and changed tyres. He's either changed tyres or he's tried to repair the damage, but I highly doubt he's gone and changed tyres at this stage because, well, actually the rain has near enough stopped falling. There are a few drops still falling from the sky here or there, but the track is very, very wet. Unless he's bargaining on the slick tyres and trying to hold on, this could be a very interesting strategy by Dakuza here. Certainly with the amount of spray that's still being kicked up by the car would indicate that the track is far too wet for the slick tyres, but yeah, we'll keep an eye on him as this race continues to unfold, as Intergalactic Gentleman is, well, he's now lost the position to Burnetto. I think Burnetto has actually finally managed to take that position from Intergalactic Gentleman as he's sliding on past a GT4 car, or almost did. Yeah, thank you, Shooter. I didn't think that he did take any fuel on, and didn't seem or look like to me that he took any fuel on, judging by the fuel indicator and the speedo that we have there on the right hand side of the screen. But yeah, I am wondering if he has gone for the tyres, and you can actually see that one of the Aston Martin drivers pushed him, seems to have a lot of damage to his car. Still pushing on. Again, not entirely sure if that's actually representative of the damage that he actually has. Seems like there are a few raindrops still falling from the sky, but yeah, not entirely sure how wet the track actually is for these drivers at the moment. As they continue to drive around on these wet tyres, they will clear the water from the surface of the track relatively quickly, and we're now roundabout in and around the window where the wet weather will transition from wet to dry. And it seems like in some places, some parts are a little bit drier than others, and actually pushed them going to take to the pit lane as well. So perhaps Dakuza has gone for an alternative strategy and jumped onto the slick tyres early. The interesting thing for Dakuza though is the slick tyres would have been preheated, but driving in wet conditions cools down the tyres quite rapidly, so we would have lost temperature, whereas the drivers who hold on to the wets for the moment and decide to switch to the slicks later on when the track is drier, they'll be able to maintain the temperature in the tyres a fair bit better than probably what Dakuza is doing. Seems to be relatively smooth though for him coming through the turn 1 and also turn 2. Dowking, just seeing has gone through on the shot there and put another lap down on Dakuza, which is obviously only natural with multi-class racing. Dowking on lap 12 at the moment. The Ace is going to be the next driver to come through, and then there's Bo in the background there. So let's go take a look at some of the other drivers. Andrex still pressing on at the moment, and we should actually keep an eye on D'Couza's lap times in comparison to Andrex's. Obviously D'Couza's previous lap time is a 2:45.5 that we can see there on the left hand side of the track, but that was an out lap. Andrex doing very low 2:30s. Scott, his teammate behind him, doing mid 29s at the moment. Where is D'Couza on track? He's kind of in and around nearing the halfway mark, so it's going to be a while yet before we actually get a representative lap time. See whether it's dry enough. Here's Dalking closing up onto the back of TPW, coming through the kink, doing the right thing, just backing out of the throttle a little bit there to ensure that he continues the speed and momentum and doesn't get caught up on the back of the GT4 car in the actual turn. I'm seeing Gav giving plenty of room there to Dalking on the inside, which is interesting, can be a little bit worrying. Obviously he made that pretty clear, so Dalking wouldn't have lost any time for it. It's just some other situations it could be pretty dangerous for the GT4 cars to move out of the way of the LMP3s, because obviously the LMP3s know that if the GT4 cars stick to the racing line, they'll know exactly where they'll be at what point in the corner, and they can judge the convergence point and basically time it so they can slip past without losing too much time or losing too much momentum. And that hasn't really affected the Ace. And Dalking, the gap between the two when passing those cars. We've got an LMP3 driver off on the right hand side. I think that was, yes it was, Bonetto, who's having a slight spin. So I'm possibly wondering if the track is starting to dry out a little bit. Some of the drivers could potentially start to see their wet tyres starting to heat up more and potentially into the realms of overheating. Generally the wet tyres do handle pretty good when they are nice and cool and around the 30-40 degrees mark. I know that once they do start to get hotter, they do start to lose some of their grip, especially when they get to over 80-90 odd degrees. They really start hurting and start crying out for some cooling. Aaron on the back of Flaming Parrot, as we can see, just 0.3 of a second separating the two at the moment, as Aaron gets quite a bit earlier on the brakes in comparison to Flaming Parrot. I think there may have been a little bit lag there between the two. He's going to be picking up the slipstream though, coming down Moraine Straight, or Moraine Sweep, sorry. Getting very close to the back of Flaming Parrot, almost making contact there. He's going to look to the inside though, coming into the braking zone of turn 5. Surely he's going to be able to get that move stick, providing that he can actually slow the car down enough and keep it within the confines of the track. He does. So that is Aaron now up into 6th position. TPW is closing up onto the back of Gav. So this is a battle for 5th position at the moment. You can see that track is starting to dry out quite substantially more, or at least it certainly looks like it from the trackside cams. Once you actually get onto the onboard cameras, things do look a lot wetter. There's a lot less spray that's being kicked up now by the drivers, particularly on the racing line. When they venture off of that, obviously we'll start to see a lot more spray. Oh, as TPW goes a little bit deep there, coming through the final turn. He doesn't take the trip to the pit lane, instead he carries on for the moment and has an LMP3 rocket past. See the difference there in straight line performance, and you can see that drying line starting to form with the drivers lapping around that circuit and just lifting the water off the track. Whenever they venture through any of the puddles in the standing water, they will pull that water onto that drying line and make it a little bit wetter. Likewise, if they do venture offline as well, just onto the damper parts of the circuit and come back to the drying line as well, you'll see the water being moved around a little bit of the track. Obviously with these now clearer conditions, clouds have cleared up and the sun is starting to shine through. The track temperature will be increasing, which will help to evaporate the water from the circuit and help to dry it quicker. And then obviously the natural drainage system of the circuit as well will help to dry the circuit out a little bit more and remove some of that standing water from around the track. That's obviously dependent on where the standing water is actually forming and if they are in close proximity to one of those drainage areas, one of those drainage drains that are located at various points around the circuit. So Flaming Parrot is our first LMP3 driver to come into the pit lane, certainly that I've noticed anyway. So he's probably making a potential gamble and a swap onto the slick tyres. Looks like that he has actually now had that work done on his car, as the race leaders, I believe, go through there, and Bo's actually gone and lost a whole bunch of time somewhere along the line. Has he incurred some damage somewhere? He was relatively close to 8th ace, but he's now dropped well back off and he's in 4th position. He's lost the position to Smolder. He's actually coming into the pit lane. Has he got damage to the rear of his car? I can't quite tell. It looks to be okay. The front side at least seems to be fine on his Ginetta. See him coming into the pit lane now. Yes, there's damage on that right rear. So he's got some damage to the rear of his car from something potentially backing it into the wall at some point, as 8th ace has got the gap to the leader down to under a second. Smolder is a good 18.5 seconds off. But yeah, Bo probably wanted to get that damage potentially repaired relatively quickly, and I imagine that he's probably swapping onto the slick tyres as well. What's the lap times that Dakuza's doing at the moment? He's doing 2:22s. Forgot to come back to Dakuza earlier. So he's lapping in the 2:22s at the moment. Andrex still out on track doing 2:27.9s. Those two are very close together when Dakuza dived into the pit lane. I think what Andrex could be hoping to do is essentially just run the entirety of the race on the wet tyres and not actually make a pit stop, whereas Dakuza has gone for the gamble of making the pits. But there's quite a significant gap between them. Dakuza is currently just coming up into turn 6, and Andrex is coming down Kettle Bottoms down into Canada Corner. So it's a good third of the track that's well, about a third of the track between the two drivers. So Andrex has got some LMP3s for company. One of those will be Smolder, and can't quite remember the other driver. It seems that Smolder's taking it very, very cautious behind Andrex. He's lost the momentum and instead is just waiting for the start-finish straight, as Andrex is actually now diving into the pit lane as well. This could be very costly and very interesting for the Aston Martin driver. We'll have to keep an eye out to see where he comes out in relation to Dakuza. Smolder carries on through. Dowking is also in the pit lane, probably switching to the slick tyres, as 8th ace is continuing on for another lap with track drying out fairly rapidly. I imagine a lot of these guys will be wanting to swap to the drier tyres. Dowking just waiting for the work to be complete. See that Andrex is in the pits as well as his teammate Scott as well. Apologies, he's also in the pit lane. Dakuza is just coming out of the final turn. Is Andrex rolling? Yeah, no he's not. Surely this is going to be positioned to Dakuza. We jump on board with him, we should look over to the right, and yes, Dakuza is going to go flying past the two Aston Martin drivers and will extend his gap between himself and Andrex. TPW has gone through and Andrex is now coming out of the pit lane and rejoining back onto the track. He obviously would have switched to the dry tyres, but the strategy that Dakuza employed of going onto the dry tyres early certainly worked for him, and it's now actually could potentially have him in a position where he'd be potentially in with coming away with the race lead once the pit stop phases have finished. Empire is still out on circuit. He will see that Dakuza is behind him by 42 seconds, and I imagine he'll be very closely watching that gap between the two. I imagine that he's noted that Dekuza made his pit stop earlier on, and I do also agree with you as well, Shooter, that I don't think that these wet tyres will be able to go the entire distance, the remaining 24 minutes, and the guys will need to make their pit stop and switch to the tyres. So I imagine that we'll see Empower into the pit lane on this lap. I imagine we'll also see Aid the Ace come into the pits as well. No, he's actually continuing on the wet tyres. You can see he's actually hunting for that wetter part of the circuit as well to try and cool the wet tyres down, going well over to the left hand side of the circuit. Another good option would be to go through that puddle that's there on the inside, but instead he just takes the usual racing line. Going through that standing water will cool down the tyres quite a lot. Yes, Empower is into the pit lane, but for the moment Aid the Ace is still pressing on. Dow King is out on what I imagine is going to be slick tyres. Surely he's going to be putting in those faster lap times, and we saw Bo making the pit stop earlier. He's actually ahead on track. He's ahead of Dow King as well, so if he went, I believe, with him going to those slick tyres a lap or two earlier, he's actually gone and jumped Dow King in the pits, and this could be the race lead for Bo, despite him potentially having damage to the rear of his car. Very interesting indeed. Just see the whole element, the strategy element, just unfolding in this race with these mixed conditions. Empower is now coming out the pits, and Dekuza has gone through. Dekuza's going to take in the race lead in GT4. So that strategy of going onto those slick tyres early is working out very, very nicely for Dekuza, as Dow King, I think that was in front of him. It was indeed running deep there in turn one, and Dekuza kind of following off the track a little bit, but Dekuza's got quite a decent lead there. There you go, 9.4, 9.5 seconds between himself and Empower. Obviously Empower's going to come out on nice hot warm slick tyres now, whereas Dekuza's, although he's been running a few laps on these tyres, not entirely sure what they're going to be like in terms of tyre temperature. Obviously the track was much wetter when he came out of the pit lane in comparison to Empower, and that would have cooled his slick tyres a fair amount, so he's probably trying to battle and try and bring them back up to temperature, whereas Empower's are going to be nice and hot, so they're going to be quite nice and grippy on this early part, or this first lap or so, providing that he doesn't lose too much temperature by venturing through too much water. As we see now, Smolder is now into the pit lane as well, and Aid the Ace is continuing round at the moment. He's done a 2:04.2 on the previous lap, so there's plenty of time in those wet tyres under Aid the Ace's car at the moment. Bo's previous lap time was a 2:05.3, but he's just coming through the final turn now, so it'll be interesting to see if he goes any quicker with another lap. Coming across the start-finish line, it'll be coming past Smolder in the pit lane, and there you go, a 2:03 flat, so a good 1.2 seconds faster than Aid the Ace was on the previous lap. It'll be interesting to see when Aid the Ace pits where they actually come out in relation to each other, because I think that Bo did make a mistake somewhere along the line and lost an awful lot of time before actually getting into the pits, because we saw him lose the position to Smolder and be a good 20 or so seconds off of the lead. And obviously he's going to have his work cut out for him to try and close that gap down, but the longer that Aid the Ace stays out on circuit on these wet tyres, the easier it's going to be for Bo to close that gap down. And at the moment Bo is currently holding on to a net second position. As actually Smolder has gone and taken the position away from Dow King as well. Both of them have made their stops, unless Dow King accidentally took on fuel when he didn't want to, running a little bit deep there in turn 5, but managing to keep it within the confines of the circuit. Improving on his lap time though, as the track is probably continuing to dry. You can see that drier line that was pretty visible earlier is now near enough expanded to the full width of the circuit. Oh, as he catches the grass a little bit there, under braking going into the corner. There is the standing water as well around the circuit that the guys do need to be wary of. Dow King going for a very wide entry and a very late apex rather than a double apex approach to turn 9 and 10 in the carousel. Completely flat out through the kink, no issues there, such as the downforce on these LMP3 cars. And yeah, it seems like the track is drying out quite substantially, and it's just really the odd little place here or there where there's still a little bit of water remaining, and then obviously we've got those puddles as well where there's standing water still on the circuit. So guys continuing around, banging in the laps at the moment. The Ace's previous lap was a 2:05.4, but Bo's was a 2:02.5, so almost 3 seconds there taken out of the Ace's lead on the previous lap. That's obviously going to be very, very important if the Ace does decide to go into the pit lane, and I imagine that he'll be able to see Bo on the leaderboard. And yes, the Ace is going into the pit lane now, realising that the gap between himself and Bo is decreasing a quite substantial rate as each lap goes by. So he's going onto the slick tyres. Obviously the track is much, much drier now as well, and is obviously going to be very suited and very safe for him to jump onto those soft slicks. So he comes to a stop. Pit crew getting to work. I doubt he'll actually be taking any fuel on board. He is taking a little bit of fuel on board actually. Just seen that fuel counter increase from 24 or so odd litres up to 32. Now we'll be getting the work done by the tyres. The tyres usually take a good 16 seconds or so, though that was very, very quick for a tyre change. So just take a swig of water there. Now where is Bo? He's coming in through turn 13, so he's not really close enough at the moment to aid the Ace to be able to really threaten him, as the Ace is coming out of the pit lane now. So I reckon the gap is going to probably be in and around 10 seconds or so. At the moment, Ruddy Bird is holding the lead, but I don't think he's been into the pits yet to make his change onto the slick tyres. And there we go, the gap is actually around 15 seconds at the moment, but obviously Bo has very much got the flow of momentum, knows what the tyres are like, will have them slightly up to better tyre pressures. And yeah, we'll have his flow, momentum and rhythm going on these tyres. So we'll probably see that gap close down a little bit, unless ADAs can really switch on very, very quickly and get comfortable within a lap or two. So let's take a look at Empower, as he's the first driver with a time penalty, 2 seconds at the moment. And Scott is lurking in and around 2 seconds behind him there. You can see him in the background of the shot. So Empower is going to need to try and increase that gap a little bit between the two if he wants to hold on to that second position. Dakuza's got a lead of a good 12 seconds at the moment, so as I was saying earlier, his strategy working out very, very nicely for him. Andrex is 15.5 seconds off of his teammate Scott, which is quite surprising because Andrex was looking pretty good. He came into the pit lanes before, or in front of Scott, but he's got a lot more fuel actually. Well, actually no, Scott's got quite a bit of fuel as well. I thought potentially that Andrex took fuel on during the pit stop way more than he actually needed to, but that's not the case because it seems like a lot of the other drivers as well have similar amounts of fuel. Obviously 15 minutes remaining. Brake check's got 40 litres, but he's also got quite beaten up looking Aston Martin there, but still he's pressing on and continuing. So what's the gap now between these drivers? Ruddy Bird has gone and lost the race lead to Aid the Ace. The gap between himself and Bo is in and around 12 seconds and decreasing as Ruddy Bird is continuing on those wet tyres at the moment. I'm wondering if he's trying to make the wet tyres last the entire duration of the race distance and seeing if he can actually get to the end to try and basically hold track position. Surely he's going to get passed by Bo though, such as the pace difference between the two. Ruddy Bird's actually previous lap time was a 2:18.2, so that must have been a mistake somewhere along the line. 8th the Ace with a 2:22.6, but we know that is an out lap, so obviously that's not representative of the lap time that 8th the Ace can actually do. And his race pace, Bo, with a 2:01.9 seems to be the fastest lap of the race so far, as far as I'm aware. Let's just double check that. Have a look. Yep. Quite easily. Smolder. Actually, no. Dowking is the closest with a 2:02.260, which was also on the previous lap as well. He's got a gap of just under 5 seconds between himself and Smolder in front of him. Be the battle for 5th position, so that's really unfortunate for Dowking. He was up there at the front of the field earlier on in the race until we made his pit stop. Now we actually see Bo is right there with Ruddy Bird. Ruddy Bird really struggling with these wet tyres. Surely that's going to be 2nd position for Bo without issue. Kicking up a little bit of spray there, and yeah, Ruddy Bird not fighting that one at all and just letting Bo go. Very gentlemanlike of Ruddy Bird. Surely we're going to see Ruddy Bird coming into the pits unless he can calm himself down and stop making mistakes. There we go. 8th the Ace's previous lap was a 2:03.2. Bo, what is your next lap time going to be? Just going to come across the lap now. 2:02.8, so he's taken about 0.3 of a second. He's got that gap down to just under 14 seconds now, actually around about 13.5 seconds coming into turn 1, although running a little bit wide there onto the slightly wetter part of the track, which sent him off wide. That's going to cost him about a second or so just in that one mistake. 8th the Ace now has actually got that lead up to, yeah, in and around 14.5 to 15 odd seconds. 8th the Ace is actually caught up behind a little bit of lap traffic. Now, when it comes to lapping cars within the same class as you, the blue flag rule does apply. The lap driver, or the driver that is being lapped in the same class, does need to get out of the way of that faster driver. You can see him coming past Empower, and Empower has actually lost the position to Scott as well. Those two drivers are now swapped positions, so Scott's up into 2nd, demoting Empower down into 3rd position. Obviously Empower's got the penalty, but he's got that 22-second gap to Andrex behind, so he's got some breathing room, and he's got a target very close there in front of him, and that's an LMP3 that's just gotten in his way and cost him the grip that he would have had through the corner. And yeah, a flash of the lights indicates that he wasn't too happy about that LMP3 car. I think the LMP3 slowed down a little bit more than it was actually necessary there, and actually held up Empower, forced him into making an error and running wide, but he managed to keep it out of the wall, so not too much harm done there. But obviously he's gone and lost the ground to Scott in front of him. Let's jump up to Dowking, as he's now at the back of Aaron, coming into Canada corner, closing up quite rapidly under braking. That isn't going to be close enough. Still a couple of car lengths back. Surely he's going to be lining himself up for a good run coming off of the final turn, trying to do it under braking into turn 1, using the slipstream up the start finish straight. Oh, there you can see the difference between the two drivers. Dowking much faster through the mid corner, and there you can see the straight line speed. Just a small snippet of draft that Dowking actually managed to pick up, but I think Dowking's probably running a more error efficient setup, but still Aaron is there holding the inside. Contact between the two drivers, that's going to push Dowking up a little bit wide and allowing Aaron to hold on to the position. To be fair, it was reasonably fair between the two. It wasn't as if that either one was really squeezing over to the other. I think they just slightly misjudged the distance between the two. But Dowking's got an almighty run coming off of the exit of turn 3. Coming down Moraine Sweep though, Dowking is being forced to the outside once again. Aaron defending that inside line. Dowking eking a little bit further. Who's going to be the latest of the late breakers though? Dowking's going to be forced to take to the puddle on both the entry and also the mid corner. It's going to be Aaron holding 5th position still for the moment. It's very good defensive tactical driving there by Aaron to hold Dowking off, forcing him to take to the puddles. Obviously with the slick tyres he's going to lose a lot of grip. There's no real passing opportunity there in turn 7. The driver in front of you is just going to chop the nose off the front of your car. if you try and peek your nose in on the inside. So Dowking doing the right thing of backing out of that move. Aaron running very, very deep in the latter corner though. Dowking trying to be opportunistic and poke his nose there. Very, very close between the two. Aaron trying to squeeze Dowking over a little bit. Dowking's got the inside for the kink. Surely Aaron's going to have to back out of it. No, both drivers going side by side through the kink. This is brilliant action between these two guys. Aaron putting up an almighty defensive fight to hold off Dowking in this battle for 5th position, forcing him once again to the outside. Coming through Canada corner, but Dowking seems like he's got the better measure of Aaron though, and has managed to take that position away from him. Brilliant battling between the two LMP3 drivers. Absolutely fantastic stuff in the final 10 minutes here, and we've got a little bit of lap traffic there in front of us as well. And Dowking will be picking up the slipstream and sliding on past. I imagine that Aaron will be doing the same as well, and hoping not to get caught out by that GT4. Yeah, he slots himself between the two and tries to keep pace with Dowking, but fantastic defensive driving by Aaron. Oh, as he goes a little bit deep there, making a mistake into turn 1. Doesn't manage to rejoin back onto the track though without hindering the guys behind him too much. But yeah, fantastic, brilliant battling as Brady Bird is now the next man in Dowking's sights. Gap of 2.5 seconds, and Smolder has managed to get himself now up onto the podium. So Brady Bird is continuing on these wet tyres. He still hasn't made that stop. Oh, is there contact between Dowking and... Was that contact between Dowking and I think... and it wasn't Andrex. Who was it? Was it Scott? Or was it M.P.O.W. that went into Scott, making a mistake under braking there? That was a very hefty impact that we saw. I think it may have been M.P.O.W. Yeah, there's damage to the front of that Ford Mustang, and he's gone and given the position back to Scott as well. That happened right in front of Dowking and also Aaron. But I know that in previous rounds that M.P.O.W. has struggled with the brakes with that Ford Mustang. I think there may have just been another incident, possibly catching the puddle as well. And obviously, with the lack of bite, aquaplaning across the surface of the water, going straight into the back of the Aston Martin. But it looks like the Aston's got quite hefty damages. It's quite slow there off the exit of turn 10, the carousel. M.P.O.W. closing up quite substantially on the straights. I know that M.P.O.W.'s no doubt got damage to the front of his Mustang. He's got a gap at 23 seconds though to Andrex behind, and M.P.O.W.'s going round the outside in Canada corner of Scott, but Scott's fighting him and holding him off. M.P.O.W.'s going to have the inside line though for turn 13, but Scott sweeps around the outside to hold on to that second position in class, keeping M.P.O.W. behind him for the moment. Will either the two drivers go to the pits? No, they're both pressing on. I've only got 6 minutes remaining in this race, so there's no real point of diving into the pits to get the damage repair. You might as well just battle it out on track, as M.P.O.W. has got the straight line speed advantage over the Aston Martin, but it's being forced to go to the outside coming into turn 1. Will he be able to make the move stick though? Oh, he catches the puddle there on the entry, and that sends his car aquaplaning slightly into Scott. There was contact between the two, but it was lighter than it was previously, and that has allowed Scott to retain the position for the moment. And yes, shooter, I do believe that Dowking did actually make it past these two guys without incident. Initially I thought it was Dowking that had gone into the back of Scott, but obviously with M.P.O.W. that we've now pretty much gathered and clarified that it was the Aston Martin driver, the Ford Mustang driver of M.P.O.W. that was the cause of the accident. Brady Bird is now being passed by Dowking, which I think was pretty much inevitable. Obviously Dowking on the fresh tyres, or the slick tyres. He's actually lost the position to Aaron as well. Whoa, that was very, very close between the two, coming up towards the kink there. I think Aaron lifting out to potentially try and serve a slowdown penalty or something like that. Dowking being caught out by it, it's gone and taken the position back, so Dowking has resumed his position in 5th. Brady Bird is there in 6th place. No, sorry, that was a lap driver. Aaron is further up the road from Dowking? Okay, yeah, my apologies. Getting a couple of drivers there mixed up. So Dowking was getting caught out by a lap driver there going through the kink, which he's managed to obviously now pass coming in towards Canada corner, but he has still gone and lost the position to Aaron again. So what happened between the two? Was there possibly a mistake on the previous lap? Because Dowking's lap time this time around was a 2:03.6, whereas Aaron's was a 2:05.6, so he's taken 2 seconds out of him on the previous lap. Bo is still banging in the lap times and going as quick as ever in these final 3 minutes and 45 odd seconds, doing a 2-minute 0.4, which, yes, is the fastest lap of the race as well. Empower still the only driver with a time penalty at the moment, and it is still 2 seconds, and he is still relatively close to the back of Scott in that Aston Martin in front of him. And Dakusa running away with a 20.5 second lead. Brilliant stuff by Dakusa to obtain that one. His strategy working out very, very nicely for him. Andrex still a good 32 seconds off the back of Empower, and Andrex is still doing 2:26s. I'm wondering if he's on wet tyres still, maybe. No, he didn't actually end up changing tyres, or the wrong tyres were put onto his car in the pit stop. And here is Aaron and Dowking actually going at it once again, picking up the two drivers side by side coming through the King. Dowking's got the inside line though for Canada corner. Will Aaron be able to hold it around the outside? No, he's just going to slot in behind for the moment. He's not going to be able to do the switchback. It's quite difficult to do in these LMP3 cars because of their aerodynamic performance, where they are able to carry the speed and momentum through the corner, and if you've got a driver who is on the optimum line and is able to make use of the full width of the circuit, usually they can use that little bit of extra speed and downforce to their advantage to prevent any opportunity for the other driver that they're passing from making that switchback on the exit. And you see here Aaron actually getting caught up behind TPW. Where is Niklas Pickawickel? He's 7th in class at the moment, so not too bad for him. He'll get a relatively decent points haul from this race for that. And Scott and Empower continuing to battle on. These are the two closest drivers on circuit at the moment. Bo is going even quicker though with a 1:59.8. Another fastest lap of the race and taking another second or so out of Aid the Ace, but Aid the Ace does have that 6.7 second lead. So he's got that cushion for the remaining 1 minute and 20 seconds. And then that lap, Empower's looking to the outside of Scott though, coming in towards turn 1. Will he be able to avoid the puddle this time? Yes, they do, but Empower's still trying to hold it around the outside. Scott giving him the racing room that Empower needs to hold it there. They're still side by side as they come in towards turn 3. Empower a little bit later on the brakes, running a little bit deeper. Scott coming back at him at the exit and slots in front as Empower is now having to tuck in behind. We're starting to see a few raindrops starting to fall from the sky, and no, I do not want to be quitting from this session. I want to be watching these two drivers go at it and battling away as they come into the braking zone of turn 5. Watch out for that puddle. Empower just about managing to avoid it and avoid making contact with Scott, although the two of them did come very, very close there, just at the apex. I think Empower is going to need to follow Scott on for the next portion of the track. Where is Aid the Ace? He's coming into turn 5 now, so this is going to be the final lap of the race as we're coming into the last 10 seconds. Once that countdown timer comes to 0, it'll be this lap that will be counted as the last lap. So he's still got that 5-second cushion to Bo behind him, as we see a lagging Aston Martin is further up the field, but that cleared relatively quickly. Galactic Chantman is relatively close to Brzanczak, and here is Empower and Scott actually going side by side, coming through the kink. They're coming down towards Canada corner. Scott's got the inside line on the braking. Surely the Aston Martin is going to be a little bit better on the brakes. It's gone and lost the control of the car though. That's the position to Empower. Scott needs to recover quickly and try and hold on to the back of that Ford Mustang in front of him. Empower does have that 2-second penalty. The gap has increased to 2.5 seconds. So if Scott can close it by half a second, he could get that position back with that penalty that Empower actually has. The Ace is just behind these two drivers. He's coming through the final turn now and coming up over the crest of the start finish line, and it's going to be the race win for the Ace in the LMP3 class. Very impressive performance and strategy employed by him to take the win in the end. Bo comes across the line in second place. I imagine that Smaller will be coming across the line in third. Where is Dakuza on track? He's just down at turn 5 at the moment, so there's a few more drivers still to go as of yet. This is the battle that we need to keep an eye on. Scott as... oh no, he's made another mistake somewhere along the line. Coming out the exit of turn 3. That's dropped him even further off the back of Empower, and that's ruined any chance of him potentially being able to hold and retake that second position from the penalty. Really unfortunate last minute or so for Scott, where he's made 2 quite significant mistakes. That's cost him the second place on the podium. Smolder has now come across the start finish line to take third position in LMP3. The Ace is there doing some donuts, and if I am correct, the Ace I think has come away with the championship win in the LMP3 class. Dowking has come across the line for 4th position in LMP3, with Aaron there confirmed in 5th. Bazanchek is still going round on track, not entirely sure if he is actually completed the lap or not. Dakuza is coming into the final turn now, the leader of the GT4 class. Here he comes out of that final corner. Coming up the line as we got a part United Autosports Ligier there at the bottom at the entrance to the pit lane. But Dakuza coming across the start finish line there, closing up the championship on Scott and keeping that fight alive. But I believe that Scott, actually no, Scott will come away with the GT4 championship as well in this race, providing he finishes in that third position that he currently holds. Empower coming across the line now as well to take second place in class, and despite that 2-second penalty, he is going to hold on to that second position. Scott coming in to take third after a couple of mistakes in those last minutes of this race. Excuse me. But I do believe he has come and won now the championship for the GT4 class. Andrex has already come across the finish line to confirm 4th. Pushdom is there in 5th. Gav is in 6th position. TPW coming across the line in 7th place. It's just a couple of other drivers coming across the line. It's actually Jay Peaches who's parked down there at the entrance to the pit lane, and he is out of fuel. That is why he is parked down there. He has not actually come across the start finish line to complete the race, but because he has completed 90% of the race distance, he should end up still being classified. So here is then your LMP3 qualification, or race results shall I say. The Ace in first with Bo second, Smolder in third position, Dowking in 4th, Bazanchek there in 5th place with Intergalactic Gentleman in 6th. 7th came Flaming Power with 8th going to Jay Peaches, and then Bernetto taking 9th position in class and finishing 20th overall as he retired earlier on in the race. And then GT4 class, Dakuza coming away with the race win with Andrex showing as second, although Empower was actually second and Scott was third. I think the 2 drivers have left the session, hence Andrex being classified as second, even though Andrex came across the line 4th. I believe Pushton 5th, Gav in 6th place, TPW in 7th, Marauder in 8th, Nyla in 9th place, 10th with Brake Check, and then GTS Carlito in 11th. Pretty sure that was the final position, but yes, Just seeing in the chat there, yeah, Andrex confirming that he pitted and then going out on fresh wet tyres rather than the slick tyres, which then obviously would have been the reason why he ended up losing touch to the guys in front of him. But even still, 4th position isn't too bad. You guys wrapped up the team championship as well, so well done to you. And yeah, Bonetto running out of fuel on the 3rd to last corner as well, seeing there in the chat. So a very, very entertaining race. Congratulations to Scott and Aid the Ace, because if my calculations are correct, you have both won the class championships. Scott taking that GT4 class championship and Aid the Ace taking the LMP3 Drivers Championship. Very impressive stuff by you guys, but that was a very entertaining race. I thoroughly enjoyed that. I hope that you guys who are still here in the chat also enjoyed it. Thank you very much for tuning in. Make sure to come back next week, same time, 8 p.m. UK time, and we'll have coverage of round 6 for the final round of the IMSA Lights Endurance Series, where we shall be racing at the Daytona International Raceway with the road layout of the circuit. It's going to be a 90-minute race, and although there isn't a championship or overall championship to fight, obviously there's a number of other positions that are still up for grabs, and also it should be a pretty entertaining race. So yeah, so thanks very much for tuning in. Hopefully I should catch you again next time. Make sure you subscribe to the Apex Online Racing channel to avoid missing out on any future league streams. And obviously I do also have a channel myself, so I would very much appreciate it if you go and check me out, and if you enjoy the content there, feel free to also hit that subscribe button. Just hitting you guys with the shameless plug. But yeah, thank you very much for watching. Hopefully we should catch you once again next week. I've been Yorkie065. Have fun, stay safe, and take care.